Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I'm Bill Arnold, and I have fun every day. I have extra fun when J. Warner Wallace comes on, and today's that day. Always glad to find out what's going on in his smart brain, and he can be found at coldcasechristianity.com. That's his website. Also, his brand new book, which I think has been out for a little while, but his latest book is called The Truth in True Crime: What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. Jim, so nice to have you back.
I'm so glad to be with you, brother.
Thank you.
So long, huh?
Well,
before summer.
Yeah, it
feels like summer went by so fast, right? But
yeah, and
I'm glad to be back with you.
And you spent a portion of it in Alaska, didn't you? Please update on how that went.
Well, it was great. We were up there with the Billy Graham Association doing marriage resiliency for police officers who are involved in traumatic incidents, critical incidents. Usually, many of them are injured because of a shooting, or they got ambushed, or whatever happened to them, and they ended up really kind of struggling with how do I go forward. And of course, that impacts your marriage. But to be honest, a lot of it is just the stuff that impacts any of us when we suffer trauma. Like how do you move through traumatic experiences, especially as a Christ follower? And a lot of these guys come up as, not everyone, but a lot of them come up and they, this is a Billy Graham Association event. So they probably figure you're going to get some Billy Grahaming up there, right? If you're going to come.
Right.
And so they come. But I mean, a lot of them are maybe never really considered the gospel or considered their place in the story until they get there. And so for a lot of people, I think it is eye-opening.
And is it about a week-long visit they spend there with you?
Yeah. 6 days, and they come up 4 couples at a time, and it ends up being opportunity really to be really focused. Every session is focused on marriage, but to be honest, we end up talking about all the larger issues that come along with whatever is causing your marriage. So I always tell people you bring a lot into your marriage from your childhood, and those issues just kind of get amplified as a result of what we go through. And then you have a traumatic experience, and it feels like it'd be easy to point to the traumatic experience and say, oh, here it is. This is, this is the problem. I have this problem right here. When in reality, most of us bring these problems to the trauma, and then the trauma just puts a magnifying glass on it, right? So a lot of us, that's the one thing I can say we all know with certainty, that all of us will suffer in some way. And so that's the one common denominator, I think. And it's what's amazing is I don't think people think of Christianity this way, but it turns out that the Christian worldview has the most resources to address suffering, far more robust and complete resources to address suffering than, let's say, secular humanism or any other atheistic perspective. I mean, our Savior knows what it was to suffer, and our story doesn't end in the 90 years we get to spend here on planet Earth. So I think that there are I remember one time hearing Tim Keller talk about this and say that maybe you and I have already discussed this, but how if you are holding an atheistic worldview, you would be smart not to think too deeply about your worldview, because you'll find yourself becoming hopeless. Because from that insignificant beginning through evolutionary processes to the insignificant death you're eventually going to experience, nothing really matters if you're living in a universe that eventually is going to die. Nothing you do can stop it. Nothing you do can ultimately impact it. You can't even have impact. Your great, 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 great grandkids will not know who you are any more than you know who your grandparents that far removed, great, 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 great grandparents were. It turns out under atheism, all of this is eventually going to be wiped clean in a universe that is heading toward death. Now, on the other side, you can also be hopeless as a Christian, but that's because you haven't been thinking deeply enough about your worldview. Because it turns out that if Christianity is true, we don't die, and what we do has an impact for all eternity. And your life does matter, and what you do in your life does matter, and all justice and all joy and all desire does not have to be met in the 90 years you get here on planet Earth. Because let's face it, I work cases where sometimes justice is never met. You're never satisfied in this life. And so if there is no life beyond this one, then you might as well just say, well, nothing really matters. Whatever you can get away with it.
Wow.
Whatever you can achieve, try to achieve it because this is all you have. So I think when couples come up and we kind of get, talking about these kinds of issues that people who either maybe have never heard the gospel and maybe their spouse does, brings them up, or people who maybe who've heard the gospel but have never taken it seriously. So, for example, this year we had 24 couples come up in the course of 6 weeks. 13 people got saved. We did 24 baptisms because a lot of people got rededicated, and we did 24 marriage renewal ceremonies.
Wow.
So this is kind of what happens up there. And what I love about it is that when I served there, Susie and I are just volunteers, and no one knows that I've written a book. No one knows anything about me. And so you get to be invisible and just see what God's going to do in this crazy place, and I get to go along for the ride. So it's an amazing experience.
Jim, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing those numbers too. It's transformational in these lives and in these marriages, and what an incredible opportunity. And then your humility to show up as sort of a behind the scenes guy, not letting them really know that you are an author. And do they know that you spent your career in law enforcement?
Well, yes. And so it typically starts off is I will start talking about the evidence. So part of it I'm trying to do is to show that Christianity is both true and good. It's true, so you can trust it. It's good because it changes everything. And so I often will make the case as part of what we're going to do over the course of those 6 days. And as I'm making that case, they kind of go, oh, wait a minute, this looks like something more than just you talking off the top of your head. So by the time that I leave, they leave. Many of them have started to look for me online because we do, unfortunately, even though we're in this very remote place, we do have Wi-Fi up there. And so they'll start to dig around online and see if they can figure out who you are. So some do and some don't. So it's really kind of cool, though, that's not why they're coming. When you're a speaker, people come to conferences because so-and-so is going to be there. And so they already know who so-and-so is. This is different. This is people are coming because they're in their last. I mean, we had two couples in June who just didn't make it because they got divorced before they came.
Oh, wow.
And so they're really at their last, and they'll often say on their application, this is it. We're down to the point where we're ready to pull the plug. And when you read that, you're going, okay, this could be an interesting week. But I know I have complete confidence that that's how they're feeling now. But by the time God gets them in this place, and it's an amazing place. Look, it's totally off the grid. It's so strikingly beautiful. Have you ever thought about this? Often Scripture points us to big things so we will remember God. Like, look at the stars. You'll see this in Scripture. Look at the vast number of stars in the universe as you look in this nighttime sky. Look at this huge mountain. Look at this amazing natural environment, right? And Scripture writers point us to these things as if to say that there's some connection between the awe we experience in nature and the awe we ought to experience when we think about God. And you think about this a lot when you're up there. I'm like, why is that? Because people come up there, and we're 50 miles from Denali, which is the old Mount McKinley, and it's the largest mountain on the North American continent, and it's the tallest climb of any mountain because it starts off at about 1,700 feet. It's a much higher climb than Everest because Everest starts off at a much higher elevation. And this thing is huge. And I think when people look at it, I think what big things in nature do is they put us in perspective in terms of how small we are. And then we can recognize that there's something very similar when we compare ourselves to God. So if you can put yourself in nature where you're up against something really big and you realize how small you really are, I think you're starting to come close, at least philosophically, to how small we are compared to God. And that's why I think those kinds of environments do open the door to conversations about God, to thinking more clearly about God and our role in the universe. So I think that's part of the magic of that place is that it's this place where you're surrounded by big, beautiful things that you just go, wow. There's a wow factor.
I think of Psalm chapter 8, verses 3 and 4 that says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them?"
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's
that awe
exactly.
factor.
As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go there right now because I'm doing my small group has got a Bible study, and so I'm trying to catch up on my homework as I'm getting ready to talk to you. But I want to go there right now on that song because
Please do.
I think that's something you have to really. I want to circle it right now just so I can go back to it because that's exactly what I'm talking about. There is a relationship between um, seeing big things in the natural environment. And it's not like you have to think, oh, look, God made this. I really do think it has to do with you're seeing, who am I? That's what the psalmist says here.
Right.
Who am I that you would even think about me? That's really, that you would care that I'm reading in the ESV. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Wow. That's really, it is exactly what you experience in Alaska for sure.
And Jim, don't we understand that my next heartbeat comes at the mercy of an all-sovereign God?
That is something we don't often think about.
Why not?
Well, because I think we see God, maybe it's just culturally in the church, we often talk about God as creator.
Yeah.
We fail to think about him as sustainer. Like in the sciences, I think it's still a mystery. We know kind of some of the mechanisms that keep our body temperature where it is.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to what is behind those mechanisms, like why does it work at all? There's still a great amount of scientific mystery about that, right? Like there's some animating force, not just in the universe, but also in our biology that keeps all of this in motion. Yeah, that God is more than just the creator. Because I think it's really easy for Christians, and I'm guilty of this too sometimes, to think of God more like a deist than a theist. A deist kind of believes that there's a creative being in the universe that sets everything into motion, but really isn't paying attention after that. It's kind of the cause of all things, but is not the director and sustainer of all things. That's really the difference between deism and theism. And I think that if I'm not careful, you can slip into that. Like, okay, now it's all on me, A deist is not going to pray to a God that he doesn't think is still active in the universe. When you find yourself struggling to pray or thinking it's all on you, then you really are kind of slipping into more of a deistic way of thinking about God than a theistic way of thinking about God.
Mm-hmm. I really love this strategy of getting out into that kind of magnificent environment where you do understand that there is something that is so incredible that it was created by someone. We're going to understand that I'm small and there's something much bigger in the world than me. I mean, even for a non-believer that comes to this retreat in Alaska.
Oh, no, there's no doubt about it. And I think that part of it, too, is that there's a sense when you're there, the way the staff is organized, the way it's a very small group that's actually ministering to these couples. So the couples are almost as large as the staff that's serving them, the number of couples rather. And so I think there's part of like a family setting, like, you have a sense that when we're on the other side of our grave, that we're going to be in close community with souls that we will know in a much more personal way than we know them today. And so when you put yourself in a position in front of this amazingly large, creative, beautiful creation, and you're in a community that gets to know you deeply and personally really quickly, there is a sense in which you're living in this weird vortex with 1 foot in planet Earth and 1 foot in heaven. Like, I'm going to give you a peek, and then you can kind of see what it's going to look like, what it's going to imagine this all the time. And then, so I think that when couples get to experience that, even for that little week, they come back transformed.
Really, really amazing. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. We're going to take a little break and continue our discussion. The nice thing about Jim is I can have 5 different topics in 1 hour, and we're going to cover it all. So we'll be right back. Hi, podcast listener. I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. I'm with J. Warner Wallace today. He's a Dateline featured cold case homicide detective. He's a very popular national speaker and best-selling author, and he's nice enough to be a regular guest on the show. And he's also authored many books. I encourage you to start stocking your library with his work because it's so good. You can go to coldcasechristianity.com. His latest is called The Truth in True Crime. And I think you will enjoy that. I was a page turner. I've been through it twice, and it's a wonderful book. All right, Jim, let me ask you this. Just with your time spent with people in law enforcement who have gone through traumatic issues and have problems in their personal life, give me your current temperature on how people feel about public safety today and law enforcement.
Well, I think it's, we started all of this because BGA was concerned about kind of the demoralization of police officers. Because remember, no matter what incident that occurs in the United States that you would look at and say, oh, that is terrible, it never represents everyone in that group. I don't care if it's an abusive doctor, abusive cop, whatever it may be that makes the news. It seems like law enforcement is one of those. Like if you read a story about an abusive doctor who, for example, there was a fertility doctor in Texas who ended up inseminating like all of his patients. And so now he's apparently found out that he's got kids all over the place when his patients were thinking they were not being inseminated by this doctor. And sure enough, now, does that mean that people have just given up on doctors? Of course not.
No.
But it seems like if you see this on the news about a police officer, that our first reaction is all police officers are like this. And so I think that and this work started because in response to that, there was a sense in which, hey, we can't paint everyone with this terrible broad brush. And we do believe this is a necessary profession. Of all the essential services, it turns out protecting the public from crime, from evil, is a pretty essential service. I would argue it's the most essential service because you can't have any of the other seemingly necessary professions unless you have this one in place first. And so I think that's why this whole thing started. Now, since this has happened, since the George Floyd riots, and since all of that occurred, I think you saw a quick knee-jerk reaction that we should defund the police. And that occurred in several locations. And then you saw at some point that people said, well, that's not going to work. And because you saw incidents of either property crimes or violence increase. And so it turns out all of those folks who wanted to defund the police actually ended up refunding the police and then going out and providing bonuses to try to grab people back.
Right.
Our agency, for example, believe it or not, our agency just passed, and the city council just passed a proposition in which they're going to bonus people who lateral over from other agencies. If they have enough, if they have a good record and they've been working at the other agency long enough, they'll give them $100,000 bonus to join our agency. That's how far down we are in terms of hiring. They'll even bonus people who stay. Well, why is that? So what's happened is we went from let's defund everyone to let's rehire everyone and pay them more. Well, why is that happening? Because there's always a pendulum swing. Like these things have consequences. And I knew once we heard this defunding movement start, I thought, just be patient because this is one of those things you can't defund.
Right.
It'd be like saying, hey, we're against water. We're going to make water illegal. At some point, someone's going to say, hey, I'm thirsty.
Right.
So I think that it's going to swing back, and it has. But here's what I would say is happening. That pendulum that we talk about that swings back and forth depending on the political climate. Well, it's sitting on a table, and the table is starting to tilt. So when it swings way out much further to one edge than it ever did before. And when it swings back, it doesn't quite swing as far back because the table is tilting. And I do think that the table is tilting. And what's happened is we've stepped away from our Christian worldview in a country that was really built on a Christian world. You could argue, well, I don't think the founding fathers were all Christians. Okay. But it's pretty clear that amongst that group, there were a significant number of pastors whose worldview seems to have infected the entire group. So, so we've been built largely on this Judeo-Christian worldview. And as it moves away, as we move away from it, we will pay a consequence. This is why I think Dawkins, I think, I don't know if I talked to you, maybe it was right the last time I talked to you, Dawkins had just made that statement, the famous atheist in the UK, saying that he considered himself a cultural Christian as a very outspoken atheist. And what he meant was he would far prefer to live in a culture that's been shaped by Christianity than to live in a culture that hasn't. And I thought that's so enlightening, right? Because what
Mm-hmm.
it tells us is that, yeah, there are some good benefits here that you can't take for granted. That it does matter. It matters that we hold on to our values. Or what happens is the table begins to tilt, and the swings you experience are even more and more devastating to our well-being.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you were an atheist until about age 35. Why did you become a Christian?
Well, I mean, I just was struck with that I was stuck with it. It was true. I mean, I originally was
Keeping
interested
it
in
simple, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it was. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of us as cops are pretty simple. And we come in, you ask us to come in and fix this problem, and we're looking for simple solutions. Like, what can we do in the next 15 minutes to solve this problem so that it's good for you, it's good for us, and we don't have to come back here. And so for me, I was enticed to look at Jesus. I still have the Bible sitting behind me here. Um, I bought a Bible because I walked into a church and the guy said that Jesus was smart, was the smart. Like he made it sound like this guy was the most significant human being who ever lived. And I thought, boy. Well, I mean, when I was in high school, I had a sociology teacher who was Baha'i, and he made a similar kind of claim about the magnificent wisdom of Baha'u'llah. So he brought to me the writings of Baha'u'llah, and I read through them thinking, well, is this? And I remember it was like fortune cookie good. I mean, it was good stuff, but it was like, just like pocket wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of suspected that's what I was going to get from Jesus. So when I read through the Gospels and started to test them to see if they really were representing something that actually happened in the first century, in other words, did the resurrection really happen? I was convinced at the end of that process that Jesus rose from the grave. And if that happened, well, then you're stuck with this guy who rose from the grave. What are you going to do with him? What are you going to, how are you going to respond to that? And that, I think that does change everything. Now, I don't know that young people are like I was. I'm 63. So I think young people want to know, is it true and is it good? But at the time, if it's true, I mean, look, if Jesus is who he said he was, well, then at some point, I'm not going to be able to argue with him about things. So if he says X, I'm not going to say, well, yeah, but, well, no, if he's God incarnate and he says X, I got to figure, well, then where am I thinking incorrectly or where am I thinking wrongly to even hesitate to embrace X as correct? In other words, all the moral claims of Christianity are so far downstream of, did Jesus rise from the grave? Because if he did, then you're stuck with the God of the universe speaking to you. Are you
Mm-hmm.
going to argue with him? Or are you going to say, okay, I guess I'm wrong on that issue? And I might at least have to rethink my own issues. I mean, how many times have your kids, raising your kids, did they say something you knew was incorrect, and you tried to straighten them out, and they're like, no, they argue with you, and you're thinking, okay, the gap between you and your kids is pretty insignificant compared to the gap between God and you. So what am I doing here? At some point, the fact that he is who he said he was does change everything.
Mm-hmm. Jim, how do you stay patient with loved ones or people that you have conversations with regularly that keep pushing against what they say is that's what you believe, and I'm happy that you believe that, but I could never believe that?
Okay, so in the same way that when the defund the police movement popped up, I remained pretty calm because I knew you can try that, knock yourself out. It's been tried before.
Right. Not going to end well.
Ultimately, yeah, ultimately, I know it's not going to end well. So, and in the end, I'm not going to have to get, if I could, by the way, I can make myself out to be a complete jerk between here and there by raising a big fuss about this. But in the end, you're going to bend your knee to that reality anyway, because you're going to want what you tried to defund. And the same thing is true here. I don't have to get too excited about it because it's not like I'm arguing with people because I want them to embrace my personal assessment of reality. And if you don't embrace it, I'm going to be personally upset and offended because you apparently don't trust me. No, it's not that at all. I mean, in the end, I understand that people have the freedom, and which is why God has to create a universe in which we have this kind of freedom. The freedom because he's trying to create a universe in which we can love. The one thing that all of us value above everything else is the ability to love. But you logically cannot create a universe with the opportunity for love if there isn't also an opportunity for the opposite, that you have to have free agency. But that means that you've got to also give people the freedom to accept a claim or reject a claim. And that's what you want in a universe that offers the ability to love. So I don't have to get too upset about it because in the end, it's not my argument that I'm trying to win. It's not an argument I'm trying to win at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, okay, this is the reality of it. And eventually you're going to see it, even if you don't see it today. Kind of the same as the other situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you're going to come to my way of thinking on this, not because of any persuasive ability that I have, but at some point life kind of punches you in the face. And the same thing is true here spiritually. At some point, this is what scripture says, and this is what Paul says in Philippians 2, 5 to 11, right? That every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Well, that means even those who don't confess it today ultimately will. And it's not my job. I mean, my job is to very calmly and try to be persuasive to present the case. Whether or not they accept the case, that's not my burden. And also, I'm patient because I know that I was 35 before I was ever reached. So if I meet people, and I see it all the time when we get officers who come up there who now are 45, and for the first time the light bulb comes on. Well, that to me helps me to see that, it's really never too late. And I can actually delay the process even more by being a jerk, so I'm trying not to be the jerk on top of it all.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of it, I think.
Yeah. But if you have someone that comes up and says, God has just not shown himself to me. I pray, but I get nothing. I don't have any answer. I don't understand how I'm supposed to relate to him. And so I can't do the Christianity thing because I need some proof. And when you hear something like that, what is your first approach with that? What would be your first response?
Well, I think it's the bigger issue, it seems, is that the complaint really is about the hiddenness
Yes.
of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would God hide in the way he does? And as a parent that there are times that you step out of your children's life intentionally. You could step in, but that what's best for them is for you to stay out. You've given them everything they need to know. You've given them all the clear direction in the world you could possibly give them. And now you need to let them live on their own. And, sometimes the answer to a phone call is, or to a request, it's sometimes yes, it's sometimes no, and it's sometimes not yet. And I think the problem we have is if we're in a culture where we say, hey, and I've heard people say this, if you pray, God answers prayer, prayer works. God's going to answer you with interest on the loan, kind of a thing. Well, sometimes the answer is no. And sometimes the answer is not now. Maybe someday, but not now, because God's dealing with every single soul on the history of planet Earth and where you fit and what decisions you make. And none of us lives in isolation. We're all connected to the overarching course of history. And we just can't see those connections until we finally step out of it and see how everything's connected. Then we're going to go, oh, wow, I get it now. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of this is, and by the way, is God really that hidden? I think what happens is we just don't have God ready eyes. The same way that if you play, we used to call it slug bug. I don't know what you guys call it. When you drive down the street and if you saw a Volkswagen Beetle, a Volkswagen Bug, you'd punch the person sitting next to you. Slug bug. I don't know if you ever played that game, but if you ever have, what happens is suddenly you realize there's a lot of Volkswagen Bugs on the road that you were just driving right by before, because now every time you see one, it's the opportunity to punch your brother. So it's like, hey, now suddenly I realize how many there are. Well, I think a lot of things happen in life that we attribute to accident, to chance, to coincidence, that are really God acting in our life. But we don't have God ready eyes. Like we're not playing slug bug. We're just kind of rambling along and wondering, where is God? When in fact, all the stuff that we've been attributing to other forces may in fact be God, if you were paying attention.
Yeah. So, Jim, what happens when Dad's driving and you and your brother are in the back seat and you pass a Volkswagen dealership?
Oh, I know. Oh, listen, we would play this game with my kids, and there's a Volkswagen dealership here on the freeway, and
Yeah.
of course, we always, at some point, they all know what exit it's on, right? And all those cars are facing the freeway, and so like we're all just poised because you can't punch the person until you actually can see the bug.
Okay.
But we're all poised, waiting, and who's going to see the bug first? Because we know they're all parked there. And so this
Oh,
one
that's
particular, as a
funny.
matter of fact, this one particular dealership, when you would paint their bugs, they would sell a pink convertible slug bug, a pink convertible bug. And so those things stand out, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that for sure. You're looking for them.
That's funny. All right, we'll take a little break. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. Head over to coldcasechristianity.com. Check out his books and writings and videos and podcasts. They're amazing. We'll be right back.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. Yay! What's for dinner? Hey! It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold.
My guest today is J. Warner Wallace, and you can learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. Jim, we had a comment come in during the break about slug bug. Do you really slug somebody hard? I mean, is it hurtful? Because it sounds a bit abusive. Some clarification would be meaningful.
Well, no, it can be. I mean, if it's two brothers playing, then it's like you're looking for that one sore spot, that part
Right.
where the muscle is kind of got like two fibers of muscle and there's a little bit of a gap and the bone is kind of in between those two layers. And you're trying to hit that one spot or like almost like yeah, it depends. If you're playing with your sister, you're not doing that.
No, of course not.
But I had two boys and they were, yeah, definitely. And then you laugh about it. This is such the difference too. Isn't there a difference between boys and girls? That's another issue altogether. I think that the Christian worldview kind of explains that two members of the same species can have absolutely the same value, yet be utterly unique and different in how they're wired. And a lot of this is because it's design feature stuff. It's not cultural. It's not that we learn how to be a little boy. Well, of course we do, but so much of it is biochemical, that we have a certain set of hormones raging through us that create certain attitudes, certain alpha attitudes, over attitudes necessarily of caring or of nurturing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that boys will find that spot and slug their brother, and then they'll laugh about, that was a good one. Now it's my turn next, right?
Right.
And there's not any, like at the end of that, my sons didn't end up hating each other. And if they cried a little bit, they cried like in a laughing way. Oh, like that's smarts, kind of a thing. And then they're off to the next one. Well, what causes that? I mean, it's not like I had to teach them that.
Yeah.
That's just how they reacted to it. Right? As opposed to like with my daughters, I can't remember my daughters really ever playing it with each other. Like they might slug their like me or my wife, just in like fun. But never would they slug somebody who they would think would retaliate, with a slug of their own. So I think it's just a different way of approaching. And thank God for those differences. Could you imagine? This is why I think Scripture says that when we are married, we are to be one, because it turns out that neither side of this is a wholly good version of what it is to be a human, without the complementary other side that levels the scales. And I think that's why it's so important for us. And this is why when we move away, for example, from traditional marriage, in which biological parents raise their biological children together in a loving environment, we start to step away from what helps us to flourish.
Yeah. And if we're going to have a flourishing society, we need that, don't we?
This is I mean, we absolutely need it.
Yeah.
And this is not about sexism or about, no, this is about saying that the human species, even if it's just evolutionary processes, if you didn't believe in God, but you believe that we got here on the basis of evolutionary processes, okay. Well, it turns out that evolution has apparently delivered a species that requires both sides in order to reproduce. Neither side on its own can survive. So it turns out that if I had a purely naturalistic perspective on this, I'd still want to maintain the primacy of those relationships because I think it leads to the best future generation or the best chance to continue to exist.
Mm-hmm. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. In your book, The Truth in True Crime, would you talk about a little bit of the nature of murder and the evidence for God, how those two are related?
Well, I think when you work murders or any kind of violent crimes or assaults or anything that involves physical violence, what you discover is how not to do things. Like you discover pretty quickly what leads people to make bad choices, what compels people to do things that are really not even in their own best interest. And so so if you start making a list of those things, oh boy, if you'd only done this, you'd have been better off. If you make a list of all the stupid things, for example, you've ever done in your life, well, you could make a complementary opposite list of all the things you could have done that would have been just the opposite of those bad decisions you made.
Good point.
So if all you were doing is making a list of all of the stupid you've ever done, you could actually make a complementary list of all the things you could have done smartly. And I think that's what we're doing when we look at these true crime stories. This is why I think they're so popular, because people look at them like, oh yeah, like this is providing me with an entirely new set of things I know I shouldn't do. So I think that's really what opened the door for me. Now, that's not, I discovered probably half the things in that book before I was a Christian and half the things after I was a Christian. And so I actually would tell people most of the time that my view of what caused humans to flourish, that hasn't changed all that much. So I probably held a pretty parallel view to a lot of Christians with a few exceptions. Like, for example, I was very much pro-choice before I became a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that the Christian worldview is what, I just think I became more thoughtful about what is it that's in the womb. Here in California, well, this is not really rabbit trailing here, but in California, we still have a law that if you murder a woman who's pregnant, that's a double homicide. But the woman herself can murder what's in the womb without being a homicide at all, which kind of tells the people in the state that thing in the womb is only a human if the mom says it is.
Wow.
So that to me seemed, as I kind of examined that and thought about it, it just didn't make much sense. And it was that view, that understanding of what is it we're talking about? Is this a human being or not? And if it's not, then of course we can make all kinds of choices. But if it's a human, it's no different than a 3-year-old human, or any toddler, or anyone who's on the outside of the womb. And the things that make the difference between a preborn human and a postborn human are not significant in determining its humanity. So I just needed to kind of work through those propositions in my own head, and that's what I think changed. But for the most part, I was pretty conservative in terms of how I approached marriage, how I approached relationships. That success sequence that we always talk about. I was kind of raised pretty poor, and so I knew that success sequence of putting some things in a certain order to succeed in life was going to be important for me if I wanted to get out of that situation. So I think that I was already, in many ways, kind of like Dawkins, adamantly against people who thought in this imaginary spaghetti monster, the flying spaghetti monster, but at the same time, living as though the rules and the kind of principles of the Judeo-Christian worldview were actually true. That's what Dawkins is talking about. Like, he rejects the worldview, but loves what emerges from the worldview. That at some point, that's going to start to rub you the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. So, Jim, if a pregnant woman is murdered, now it's a double homicide. How are those details discussed in the courtroom? And the baby died as well, or how do they frame that in a courtroom?
Well, so it's in the statutes in the state of California that it is a double homicide unless, and there's an exception to the law, and the exception to the law is the will of the mother. So that's why I say in many ways, it ends up becoming a decision the mother makes, not so much about whether the baby can be terminated or not, but really whether the baby should be considered a human at the point of termination. That's really what it comes down to, because that's what we're deciding in a homicide. Is this a human? Because, let's face it, if I killed a woman in her backyard and also in the process of killing her, shot her dog, I don't have a double homicide because that's not a human.
Mm-hmm.
The second murder is not a human, it's a dog. So it's really about determining what is this thing inside of her. And if there's an exception in the law that allows her to decide it's okay to do it, then what you're really saying is she's determining whether or not this thing is a human that's being killed in the first place.
Wow. Amazing. We're going to take a little break. J. Warner Wallace is my guest, and you can go learn about him at coldcasechristianity.com, and I hope you do. If you have a question or comment for Jim, let me know what it is. Text it over, 877-933-2484. We'll see you back in 90 seconds. Well, I love every day opening God's Word, worshiping Him, studying His Word, and letting it speak to me. If you'd like to sign up for the Verse of the Day email, you can do that at myfaithradio.com, and you'll receive a daily scripture graphic. I encourage you to do it. J. Warner Wallace is my guest today, and if you want to learn more about Jim, head over to coldcasechristianity.com. Jim, I was thinking about how we started this conversation talking about police officers who have gone through trauma, and you were in law enforcement your whole career. So I've questioned, when you put on your uniform and you'd go to work, and as these officers put on their uniforms and go to work, how often do you think that this could be my last day on planet Earth? Because there could be an occasion where somebody draws a gun and shoots.
Well, that's part of what we talk about. It affects everything. But this is something that we talk about as we call it hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is simply the attitude that most officers have when they go to work and they realize they have to be hypervigilant for their own safety.
Right.
So one of the things that gets you fired right away, if you're a trainee and you got an FTO, is that if you're not somebody who takes officer safety seriously. In other words, you're standing in a way that presents your gun to somebody you're talking to, or you're not thinking about like what would happen right now if this whole thing went south. Like, am I standing in a position where I could protect myself? Am I standing in a position where I can really see where the threat might be coming from? In other words, every single contact, you have both the surface level conversation occurring between you and somebody on the street. And you also have this game in your mind, which is really talking about situational awareness and where am I going to position myself? And if you do that for an entire shift where you're hyper vigilant, what it does is it accelerates your adrenaline. I mean, you have to be at a high adrenaline, high alert position to do that if you're working patrol for a long period of time. And people who don't do that, we look at them on patrol, we think, I don't want to work with that guy because he's not taking it seriously. I want to get hurt working with someone like that. So what you end up doing is you end up being hyper vigilant. Now, here's why that matters. Well, it turns out that after any sustained adrenaline event, you're going to have a huge dump on the backside where you're just crashed out.
Right.
And that's usually when you go home and walk through the door and encounter your spouse. And you're going to be at your least talkative, least receptive, least energized. Like, you need to sleep probably more than anything else. Mm-hmm. But your family's been away from you all. I think, I don't know if I told you up in May when I had all of my old VHS tapes digitized. So we're looking at old VHS tapes when I was, and working in patrol, and I would come home at the end of the day and I'm just watching myself in these videos and I'm thinking, man, did my kids see that? I hope not, because I feels like I'm not even there. Like, I'm there, but I'm not there because I'm just so exhausted. And a lot of that is just the hypervigilance cycle. So we're constantly trying to help officers. And by the way, it takes about 18 to 24 hours for you to get back to the level of adrenaline you had while you were on duty. And the problem with that, of course, is that in 12 hours, you're back to work. So you really need a few days off, and you're probably not going to be the greatest version of you could be until the second day. And that's because of this constant, and not many other people, even when you're in working as if you're responding, like you're a first responder. Police officers aren't just first responders. They're actively patrolling. You have a patrol function for police officers, not like firemen. When you call us, we'll come out of this secure environment and we'll face the danger. Patrol officers are asked to go out and get in the middle of the danger all the time to prevent the danger from happening to begin with. And that's a very different ask, and it does require a level of hypervigilance. Hey, by the way, before we finish this hour together, remember I was talking about the California Penal Codes. Here's how it's written. Murder is the California Penal Code 187A. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human being or a fetus with malice aforethought. Here's the exception, 187B3. This section shall not apply if, and here's one of the exclusions, the act was solicited, aided, abetted, or consented to by the mother of the fetus. So what it's basically saying is that if you kill a human being or a fetus with malice aforethought, that is a murder. But it's okay if someone, namely the mother, thinks it's okay. If she consents to the murder, no problem. Can you imagine any other situation in which something is a murder unless someone says it's not?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So that's what that's why I think in the end, we have to decide, what is it that we are terminating? Because if it's a human, it changes everything. If you, oh, it's a dependent human. Well, if you're on a pacemaker, you're a dependent human. Can I kill you? Oh, well, it's a very small, not fully formed. Well, small babies aren't fully formed. Prepubescent teenagers are not quite mature. Can I kill them? They're not their final developmental state. Every excuse you might use to kill the less developed, more dependent human being does not make it something other than a human being. And there's the problem.
Yeah. One last question, Jim, as it ties into this, the idea of you being out working where your life could end. Are you afraid to die?
I think that's one of the, I think every cop that works, if they're honest with themselves, are battling two polar extremes. One, I will do anything I'm asked to do to protect my community, up to and including my own life. At the same time, I want to be home in time for dinner. Those two extreme polar extremes are the tension in every car, because I'll do whatever it takes, but I have a family at home. I want to get home to them, and trying to wrestle with those two desires at the same time. I think most people in their jobs, they're not wrestling with those two polar opposites.
What kind of words can us civilians say to police officers if we encounter them in public and we've got a moment to share something? What would you most like to hear?
I think the conversation has to go both ways. The conversation for cops has to be, please don't judge any of us on the basis of any stupid thing that one of us does, because no one dislikes a stupid, lawless cop more than one who's not stupid and lawless. We hate them even more than you do. So please don't judge all of us by the actions of any one of us. That's number one, has to come from our direction. Two, the other direction has to say, hey, I get it. What you're doing is a job that no human should have to do. So I'm going to grant you a little bit of grace, because I know that I will never be placed in a position where I have to make that kind of decision or be exposed to so much garbage over the period of number of years that I might have my thoughts twisted about what I should do. So I'm going to grant you a little bit of grace on this, because it's a terrible job. And the other side, our side, has to say, hey, we will have a zero tolerance for anyone who's doing these kinds of things that give us a black eye. We will have a zero tolerance for it also.
Do you have anything in the works headed to a publisher?
Oh, I've got 2 kids books I'm working on now. One is just Person of Interest for Kids, which eventually I'll get to. But right now, do you remember the old Hardy Boys series?
Yeah.
One time they had a detective handbook, and I'm trying to develop a kind of a detective handbook for kids that also will help them investigate Christianity.
And it's football season, so you're going to probably be watching some football, aren't you?
Well, yeah. And if I always tell people, if we could just love Jesus as much as we love our football teams, because, we never have to encourage football fans to talk about football.
That's so true.
We just do. But why is it we have to encourage Christians to talk about Jesus? Like, we have classes. Here's how to talk about Jesus. Here's why you should. Here's why you should evangelize. Meanwhile, tomorrow we will make a case we were just talking about this off the air, for why Josh Allen should have been the first pick in the fantasy football draft. Like, we can make that case without even having to be asked. There's the difference, I think. We have to make one as important as the other.
All right, Jim. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's always great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
All right,
I appreciate it.
J. Warner Wallace has been my guest. Learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. coldcasechristianity.com. And if you are ready to give your life to Jesus, you can text the word faith to 41224, and I hope you do. We'll take a short break and be back with Hour 2. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.
On the latest episode of the Wow God Stories podcast, we go to Africa.
I was raised in Sierra Leone in a community that truly lived the phrase, "It takes a village."
Until one day, the world outside Anita's village broke in.
I didn't grow up in a war zone, but I watched one unfold in the country I love.
God brought hope to her story and many others through radical provision.
God began to direct us towards Uganda, Africa.
I was born and grew up in the countryside of Ethiopia.
Nanjan I met in Kigali, Rwanda.
Discover how God showed up in the middle of war, loss, and impossible odds in Africa. Stories that'll make you say,
"Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God."
Wow God Stories, wherever you get your podcasts.